Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Gameweek 35 team selection. We're going to quickly recap my Gameweek 34 team, explain what it's like coming out of 3 at 34 as a non-free hitter, and just my moves for the future and that sort of thing. I think, as I said a couple of weeks ago, when I decided to sort of pivot to 3 at 33, the idea was probably not backing so many of the City players as well as the Arsenal players, given that I expected a lot of Arsenal rotation, and went about trying to target some of the low quality teams like Leicester, etc. When I bought STB a couple of weeks back for that Leicester at home game. As it turns out, of course, Brighton didn't get the clean sheets there. I think the logic of sort of targeting these awful teams has worked out really well for 34. At the same time, I think I've been pretty annoyed at some of the sort of outcomes for 3 at 34 because effectively every pick has done well. And whilst I have some of those picks on board, I don't have enough, really, I suppose, to match up to the quality of the hauls that people have on their teams. Like people have full stacks for probably the first time ever of a defense in double-digit territory. That's insane. I think just for a little bit of expectation setting, usually with defenders, I think even on a good week, the sort of expected points or projected points for a defender is probably around 5.5. So a lot of defenders have hit the upper threshold of points, and that's probably made a huge gap versus the rest of the field. I myself was fortunate to own two of them. In the end of the day, brought Aït-Nouri into the team. I think I'm so happy that Evanilson got his ban overturned. I got 60 points in the end. That's 64 minus 4 because I took a minus 4 to get towards Evanilson for the sort of medium to long term there. We don't have too many game weeks left, but it was just trying to get 11 men. Aït-Nouri was my true 11th person, and Bumo I brought in because it felt like the run up towards the end of the season was just too strong for him to kind of pass up. And that was the transfers that I made. I got Aït-Nouri, got Trippier, don't have Sessegnon, Esteban and Nico Williams, just basically nothing. 1-0 versus a lot of defenders this week who got 6 to upwards of something like 15 points like Trippier. In the midfield, we did captain Salah, so it felt a little bit nice to get a small rub of points in my ranked territory, where I think the Salah ownership was actually a little bit lower than it was at the top 10k, which makes sense. People in my ranked territory are definitely chasing a little bit harder, so they're probably welcome to differential captaincies. What's interesting is over the next 3 weeks we should actually have differential captaincies again. I'm sure undoubtedly some people will stick the captaincy on Salah, and it's quite logical for a good reason, but there's more than enough opportunities to sort of play around with differential captaincies, which I think makes it quite exciting for some decisions that I can make that hopefully on a 50-50 perspective can actually go my way. I've got to say I'm pretty bummed out. I do think the swing between 33 and 34 as a free hit has been pretty tough in terms of the outcomes for my team. Does my team look quite good going forwards? I would say so. And that's something that I can at least take away and be happy with. And this is probably the worst season I've ever had in FPL. And that's tough to take. But I think I'm planning to play this game for the rest of my life. And if I'm to have a bad season, then let this be it. And hopefully future seasons won't be so bad. Have I been happy with my process all the way up until this point? I think so for the most part. I'm sure a lot of people will just have a simple look into the rank and just say this is awful play, and I if that's their perspective, I think I have nothing to say to that. I think fair enough. But as someone who's very much guided by processes and decision making, I think for the most part this season I've not played any worse than I played last season. And last season I got a very lucky rank. This season I feel like I've got a very unlucky rank. And let's just move on. So as I said, 60 points. Stipian actually probably looks like a good sell now because I've kind of gone through some good Brighton games, especially Leicester at home where I got nothing. There's opportunities now to move towards Everton defenders, like I mentioned within the cheat sheet. I think that makes a lot of sense for myself. Nico Williams will still have that Gameweek 36 fixture, which I think is great. He actually looked really good versus Brentford, and I think he was very attacking as well. So I think that's a positive sign. Unfortunately, he did come out with 0 points because he did get a yellow card within that game for a handball in a transition play. It's nice to see Kluivert playing football again, although that Evanilson red card sort of dampened things for both, two of my sort of differential picks on this week, where I was just trying to claw some points back versus the free hitters, but Kluivert and Evanilson have effectively done nothing but just appear within a football match, and Evanilson's red card meant that his assist was effectively overturned. Palmer has looked awful, but I suppose the pro is that we somehow convinced some of the free hitters to go for Palmer as well. I still have to say that Palmer's a very weird one, where I think, obviously on the face of it, he's not been playing well. He just got an assist, I believe, within his match within the European Conference League, but it's been poor. And I think I've never seen such a significant drop off in form in someone who's posted such amazing data. And I have to say that it's interesting because just looking at it, right, as I say, he's not scored in a few months in the Premier League, but I'm looking at, let's say, betting houses, I'm looking at odds, I'm looking at models and how they're reacting to it, and nothing has changed. And I don't think this is necessarily an inflection point or a weakness in terms of models, but I think it's just a case where it's very clear that a player is playing poorly, but there's still a base level of expectation that's much higher than whatever he's put out in terms of actualized, goals and assists. And I still have to think that I'm not going to transfer someone like Palmer because I just don't have that many free transfers to address it. But a lot of people are considering moves like, Palmer to Mbeumo, Palmer to Bowen. And if you want to do it for the end of the season, because we have so many few game weeks left, I think that makes a lot of sense. Just in my position, I would say the only reason why I'm not really considering it is because I think I probably have a better move to make elsewhere within my team. And at this point, his ownership is so low. If he actually does anything, then I'll probably stand to benefit for the rest of the season. And then in the front line, we had choices like Cunha, like Wisa. I went for Evan Nilsson, mostly because I thought there could have been a small chance of a double if we were ever to get that. And that probably was going to be, if Aston Villa were to, let's say, win within the FA Cup game, I think our likelihood of actually, coming towards this game week here with double game week 36 would have been quite high. On the flip side, of course, because Aston Villa actually lost to Palace, and if you remember me talking about Tal and Nadim's predictions, it seemed like that actually was the most likely case if Palace was to win and City was to win, for us to have blanks. Or sorry, not blanks, but rather singles, right? So as it turns out, we have singles. This has been confirmed. Maybe there's still a little bit of doubt being, I think, mentioned by someone like FPL Harry, who sort of rightly pointed out that the FPL post around doubles and blanks has sort of forgotten to mention, not forgotten to mention, but has maybe deliberately not mentioned Aston Villa versus Tottenham, potentially because it could be still rescheduled. Who knows? So that's kind of the position of the team. I think a lot of people are talking about Crystal Palace players as well and selling them. I don't really like the idea of selling them too much. Clearly, yes, of course, I sold Sarr for Mbeumo, but I think that's a really good trade. If people own Eze, if people own Sarr, I think he's a really good and easy hold. I think these two players play much more minutes in general than Mateta up until the end of the season. And I can still see, for example, when I look at a game week like game week 34, moving on to game week 35, Nottingham Forest, once again, are a team to target. And Crystal Palace have such a good match here and such a good opportunity to get an insane amount of points, I would think, versus Nottingham Forest. And so I would really keep most of my Palace players, including Munoz, who I think is going to be a huge differential against me. I won't own him this week, which is why I'm quite tempted to make that sort of O'Brien type move. But yeah, that's kind of the position I'm at. We also know that Haaland probably won't be involved within the match versus Wolves, so I think Marmoush for the short term looks like still a decent pick. And I do still feel that if Haaland is maybe to come back into this team, that Marmoush's position in terms of minutes might still be quite strong. But I think I need to also be prepared for the eventuality that, let's say, coming out of the Southampton game, that Marmoush is going to be a sell after that. So for game week 37, 38, I'll probably need to just find a striker, maybe someone like Wisa. And I think that's quite a simple transfer to make. Potentially, as I said, maybe even on 36. If the minutes don't look good in terms of, let's say, future outcomes for someone like Marmoush, then I think the Wisa transfer is definitely on the cards for myself on 36 when Brentford, I believe, have Ipswich. So something to kind of look at and look forward to. But that's it for my team in terms of Game Week 34. If you did free hit, I'm not really complaining about, the decision making. I think it made a lot of sense. I think, when I was sort of thinking about planning these moves, I felt like the path of 3 or 33 for myself was probably going to be quite even in terms of expected outcomes. But as it turns out, of course, free hit 34 has won tremendously, and a lot of people have done it. So it's been a very popular free hit success, and congratulations to those. But yeah, as I said, I'm just feeling a little bit downbeat for the season, but I'm just going to try my best to make a couple more good moves, hopefully consolidate on a finish within the top 100k. Although I have to say, 4 weeks out, 4 games left, it does feel like it's unlikely to happen, but who knows? We'll just keep going. So for Game Week 35, if we want to just quickly have a look at some of the Rob T odds, basically reflecting the sort of market picture of this week. Once again, I'll mention that, there's a couple interesting sort of narrative points overall where we can see that the markets have responded to a lot of the European teams rotating. I think he actually made a very interesting post recently of Arsenal's moving sort of odds versus Bournemouth over the course of the week and really, before the PSG game and after the PSG game. So interestingly, the Bournemouth winning odds have dropped tremendously. And that's just a reflection overall sentiment wise of how betting markets have reacted to teams that are now mass rotating within the Premier League. And so that Arsenal versus Bournemouth line is now as low as it has ever been. So I think that's very significant to mention. This is actually not too bad of an opportunity to, play your Bournemouth players, which is part of the reason why I went for someone like Evan Nilsson last week. I didn't actually think that this was necessarily so bad a week if I had to play him. But in terms of Gameweek 35 matchups, we clearly have an amazing fixture for Man City, who clearly have so much to play for. Aston Villa, not the best fixture, but actually, they have a lot to play for as well. And I think that's important. Everton have the best clean sheet odds this week, hence why I actually want to move towards there. Someone actually made an interesting point about how, without Tarkowski, they weren't so comfortable going for an Everton player or thought that it was a bad idea. I personally watched the Everton versus Chelsea game, the full game. I didn't really think that Everton looked much worse. I think part of it, as I mentioned, is that Michael Keane's fortunately not playing football. O'Brien and Branthwaite actually looked like a very comfortable partnership, and Pickford still is an elite shot stopper, which is a bit of a pro. But yeah, they're against Ipswich. They're at home. It's a good match. I really like the idea of going for O'Brien this week, and I think that's where my transfer will be directed. This is compared to, let's say, playing someone like Nico Williams, who actually just has 24% of clean sheet odds. So I think there's quite a lot of expected value gain there. And because Haaland is not involved versus Wolves, I also think that his involvement versus Southampton is very much in doubt. And they're actually still getting results without Haaland, which is why I think they're still going to probably protect him so that he can actually, be fit for the Club World Cup and for the future, as opposed to anything that they really have left for the season outside of the FA Cup final. So that's kind of my thoughts. And then a lot of the other matchups this week are actually quite close. We have two of these sort of relegation, unfortunately, poorest teams in history, Leicester versus Southampton, against each other. It's an interesting opportunity potentially to maybe go Vardy if you really want to look for, shop for a forward transfer. And at the same time, we have a really good Brentford versus Man United game. Brentford coming off a great result versus Nottingham Forest, and then they're most likely going to play against a slightly rotated United team. United have actually hit a serious run of form here. And I think not just forms in terms of results, but I think the underlying data very much backs that United have put some really good results recently. The defense looks absolutely there. The attack, despite some injuries, but also Ahmad coming back, which I think is a huge pro. So happy for United fans. But that's generally, a nice little surplus for United as they try to get towards winning towards the Europa League and getting Champions League somehow. And Tottenham very much within the same sort of idea there. A lot of the other fixtures this week aren't particularly close. I'm encouraged at least that the Bournemouth line is actually above 1 goal. So for, the perspective of, let's say, Kluivert, I'm actually considering a bit of a 50-50 of whether I play Kluivert or Evan Nilsson. I'm leaning towards playing Kluivert because I actually think his expected minutes are the best that they've ever been. He really should be playing 90 minutes per match. And I think Evan Nilsson, even before the red card, was most likely to get subbed off within that match versus United. So I'm leaning towards playing Kluivert this week, penalty taker and all things like that. So my thoughts also in terms of table bonus is this is another opportunity if you have the assistant manager chip left to just simply target Nottingham Forest. You're not going to get a better table bonus bet than that, in my personal opinion, even though Chelsea has a nice line themselves. So that's kind of, where I'm at with things in terms of market. As I said, I think I'm very tempted towards making the O'Brien move. So when I reveal my team here, I'm actually planning to make this O'Brien move, and I'm planning to play O'Brien over Nico Williams, who will now be sat on the bench. And that means Estupiñán leaves the team as well after doing close to absolutely nothing, dropping binary results for me as an FPL asset. I have decided to play Henderson over Pope. I just think good opportunity to target Nottingham Forest. I always tend to prefer home games. I think even though Brighton have been poor, they still look like they have a good goal in them. I think if you want to look at some of the direction of their injuries, it's mostly within defense as opposed to, let's say, offense. Although João Pedro is clearly still suspended, and that's a big dent to sort of their forecasts. I will be playing Guardiola this week alongside O'Brien and Trippier. So in a sense, I'm still backing the Newcastle defense, but just didn't want to double up in this circumstance here where the game wasn't particularly good. And I think I actually have pretty good odds with backing Palace too. In the midfield, I'll be going Salah, Kluivert, Palmer, and Mbeumo and Eze. Vice captaincy and captaincy will probably sort for a little bit later, but I think these are the obvious picks. Most of the players with home games, Kluivert, as you can see, I've decided to play over Evan Nilsson based on the 50-50 and what my thoughts are in terms of leading over that. And I'll be playing Isak and Marmoush with Marmoush as a captain. So interestingly, I have decided to go for a Marmoush captaincy. Now, I think the vice captaincy is on Mbeumo. Yes, maybe United are expected to rotate, but I think my thoughts on that sort of game is still that it's an amazing match for Marmoush. We have been confirmed effectively that Haaland shouldn't have any involvement within the Wolves match, which I think is a huge positive for Marmoush and his minutes. I still think he's the penalty taker of this Manchester City team, so I really think, there's nothing to really get upset about when it comes to thinking about whether Marmoush is a poor quality asset. Yes, he's sort of not playing center forward right now. He's playing more of a left inside position. but he's still getting a lot of shots off. I've still watched a couple of the recent City matches, and I still think he's involved enough for me to like him, and I still think the pen share is there. It's really between maybe Gundo and KDB being maybe second and third in the hierarchy for me in terms of penalty takers, but I still really think Marmoush will take. He's had an excellent record when it comes to Bundesliga, and we've also just not seen too many opportunities where Gundo and KDB have willingly taken penalties. I know KDB took one for Belgium recently, but that was without Lukaku, so I think a significant piece, and he's never been someone who's always asked for penalties. So I think Marmoush will have the confidence to take. When evaluating picks like that, I think that's quite important. When I look at some of the market odds as well for Marmoush to score, very, very positive lines for him as well, especially since we know that his minutes should be relatively guaranteed in a landscape where Haaland won't be featuring versus Wolves. But will Pep lie to me, and will that cause an outcome that I won't like? I don't know, but I'll take my chances here with, as I said, the Marmoush captaincy, and I think not many people will go for it. I think the Mbeumo captaincy is a little bit more popular, and so this is a good opportunity, in my opinion, to go for a close call of a captaincy and probably go for a pick that I think a lot of people might be ignoring for now. I could be wrong as well, because look, we've more than recently captained Marmoush. I've captained him twice, especially the week over Salah, where I finally got some net gains versus Salah. So maybe I'm wrong on effective ownership, but I feel like Mbeumo is becoming such a popular transfer that he's also going to be a popular contender for captaincy. And I think a lot of people sort of move towards that general direction since he's had, you know, more goal involvements recently than Marmoush, and a lot of people will sort of keep that in mind. So that's kind of my thoughts in the team. The bench will be in this order. It will be Evan Nilsson, then Nico Williams, then Ait Nouri, Pope on the bench as well. And that's going to be my game week 35 team selection. So thank you guys so much for watching. By the way, just before we leave, we're actually going to do a very, very sort of quick wildcard type segment for anyone who's actually interested, because a lot of people have been asking for Wildcard 35, but I also felt a little bit bad because when I was planning to sort of research Wildcard 35, I just thought that the wildcard did feel a little bit flat, and I think there's so much budget left over in the wildcard. And I have to mention, a lot of people, and even myself included, you know, when you have so much money in the bank, you always feel like you're making the wrong decisions and maybe you're making some poor calls. But I really think, looking at the fixtures left for Liverpool, looking at Arsenal rotation, which I still think is inevitable for Game Week 35, and really the only good Arsenal game is Game Week 38, I just can't see the need really to move into these players from these teams outside of Salah. So the wildcard suggestion that I'm going to come up with is going to have probably 4, 5, 6 million in the bank, depending on your money in the bank. The two goalkeepers that I would go for would be Flecken and Sanchez. In defense, I would probably go for Guardiola, O'Brien, and Mikolenko. As I've mentioned, Everton have some of the best fixtures to close off the season. Looking at the market odds, or even, for example, my friend 11ify, you can find his website at 11ify.com. If you look at expected clean sheets for all teams within the rest of the season, Everton actually ranked top. So I would definitely go double Everton defense. A triple might be excessive, so I think O'Brien, Mikolenko is good to go. These two players should be playing all games. Then Nico Williams for that sort of Game Week 36, and Nottingham Forest generally having good fixtures. I'd also follow that up with Murillo. So clearly we have sort of stacked two defenses here, but I think these are defenses that I would still be happy to be invested into based on the fixtures that we have left. So 5 defenders from teams that you probably wouldn't expect. Well, let's say 4. And then Guardiola, who's been in all of our teams as of late. And then in the midfield, I would go with Mbeumo, Bowen, Salah, and De Bruyne. Now, De Bruyne's minutes are still up in the air. I think with Haaland coming back, maybe there's even a question as to, you know, whether the minutes would change, because maybe KDB is a little bit less essential, for example, in a structure where Haaland comes back. But I would still take my chances with De Bruyne, right? We're not going Palmer right now if you go for a wild card. Are there any picks left that are interesting? I'm struggling to find those picks. You could once again go for, let's say, Liverpool players, Arsenal players, where there might be rotation and you can kind of thread your eye through the needle. But I think it's just tough. So I really think that De Bruyne's probably a solid pick. You at least guarantee, hopefully, 2 really good games in succession in the Premier League, where hopefully his minutes are quite strong and he can deliver the goods. And then you can save your free transfers for Game Week 37, where you want to move off after a Wolves and Southampton back-to-back. In the front line, I would recommend going with, rounding out, of course, with Kluivert as well. Just a really solid pick. He still, even in a singles-only landscape, is a very strong pick as a penalty taker, as someone who now has really, really good minutes. But in the front line, to round things off, I would go with Marmoush, Wissa, and Isak. Now, the Isak position is an interesting point, because I think if you want to be a little bit crazy, you could really just go Vardy. He actually has 2 out of 4 fixtures that are really good, and I think there's enough rotation in there with a 3-5-2 structure, where on the weeks where Vardy has poor fixtures, which will be Gameweek 36 and 38, you could just have a 3-5-2 setup here. But I'd probably still go Isak. I just think this Leicester team are way too bad. That even if Vardy is someone who's on penalties, who has good expectations to score, would I be interested really in going for Vardy to close out the season versus the sort of massive threat of Isak, where not many people will be selling Isak for any reason, because I don't think there is a reason to? No. So I think I would just go Wissa, Marmoush, and Isak. For now, I think you can maximize, hopefully, the 2 Marmoush and De Bruyne games, as I mentioned. Guardiola's minutes should never be in contention. I would imagine if Haaland comes back and he's actually playing minutes, 2 to 3 game weeks in the future, that not both Marmoush and De Bruyne would be sort of impacted from a minutes perspective. But this is the draft that I would go with. And I think you have enough differential picks in here. You have to trust some of these teams who are middle of the table, bottom half of the table, but actually just have really good fixtures, and they're at least good in one sort of thing, right? Bowen is just a good pick, flat out. Regardless of his team's position, just because talisman, etc. Good underlying stats, to be quite honest, good minutes and good fixtures for what it is for West Ham. With Everton, their defense has always been strong, so you don't feel bad, in my opinion, ever investing into double Everton defense. Some people might feel differently, as I said, based on the Tarkowski point, but I would go there. And the same with Nottingham Forest as well. As much as they've looked pretty poor as of late, as much as they've had poor results, I still back Nottingham Forest to have good results up until the end of the season. And this is me, someone who actually, for the most part, has found ways to avoid Nottingham Forest this season, because I wasn't super convinced that they were as good of a team as they were when they were sort of second or third in the table. So those are my thoughts right now in terms of a Wildcard 35 draft. I wish you the best of luck if you're on Wildcard 35. Hopefully things haven't been too brutal recently for yourselves. But that's it for me. A little bit of a sloppy opening. I apologize for that. If people find that annoying, that's fine. Try my best to sort of deliver good content. And my team selections, I feel, are a reflection of just sort of decisions and sort of processes that only impact my individual team. And sometimes when you go on a very, I mean in FPL, when you go on a very specific path, you make decisions that, in my opinion, have outcomes that you're going to get that you can't really anticipate. And what I'm trying to say is I feel like I probably would have had the same level of decision making with maybe different teams at times if I made maybe 1, 2, 3 different moves, wildcard in different game weeks, free hit in different game weeks, where with the same sort of quality of decision making, I probably wouldn't have the rank that I have this season. But unfortunately, it is what it is. It is the actual rank. It's the only thing that matters at the end of the season, and I have to take it. So I'm just trying to take it all right now and let it soak in. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys have a wonderful time, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Goodbye.